And I very much appreciate this chance of what I hope is trying to get a broad support for what we are doing on offshore wind, to give a strong signal that this is a hugely important project for the development of the energy security, the climate targets, the industrial development of our country. And I want to just very briefly, if I can, in the few minutes I have, just set out some of the background as to where we are just at this moment. We'll all know we were one of the first countries in Europe, if not the world, to develop offshore wind. 7 turbines were put out in the Arklow Bank back in 2024, I think it was, 2004. And they've been working ever since, effectively and well. That was, I think, one of the first or second offshore projects in Europe, but we haven't built anything since. We instead, I suppose, put our focus onto the onshore and a range of other different investments, but particularly onshore wind, which is very successfully developed. But it is now time, long past time, many would argue, that we go back and we start to tap into the huge energy resource we have in our ocean area. Our sea area being 7 times our land area, our wind speeds being, particularly when you go to the west and northwest, southwest, being far higher than in other similar or neighbouring jurisdictions, and also the real capability we have, in my mind, in terms of renewables development. We need to deploy that in the development of offshore. In considering how we would do that, we made a decision about 3 years ago to take up a lot of the projects that had remained in the planning system, had been progressed not to construction, but in that previous 15 years, what are called the relevant projects. All of them, well, one on the west coast in Scaregea Rocks, the others on the east coast. And they had, for 10, 15, some years, been already engaged in the planning, foreshore licensing, development process. And to speed up the delivery of offshore wind industries in our country, to be able to get the first phase of, in our objectives, 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, plus 2 gigawatts that we look to see converted to hydrogen or some other such molecules, it was agreed and decided that we should proceed with these relevant projects, developer-led in the sense that they had chosen the site, the area where they'd got the license and arrangements to be able to develop and to deal with those projects and develop those projects quickly, because we are in a race here. We know that our neighbouring island, which is quite far advanced in offshore wind, but also Germany, Belgium, France, Holland, pretty much Denmark, most of our European colleagues, and indeed the US, Japan, China, elsewhere, they're all developing offshore wind. And if we're not quick, we will see the investment and the very constrained supply chain that exists for vessels, for foundation manufacturing, for cables, for the turbines themselves, go to other jurisdictions. It was on that basis the process was applied, where I, as Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications, had to consider the marine area consent, the MACs, for these projects, which we did in a very thorough, professional manner, allowing them to go into an auction process. And the idea there, but having the consent done in advance, you know if someone gets through an auction process that they really do have the capability, they really have the expertise, the financial wherewithal to be able to deliver the project. We don't see what happened, maybe what we've seen happening in the housing side, that a project gets planning permission but then doesn't get developed. We want to make sure that these projects are developed because speed is important. I'm very pleased that that auction, which was concluded some 3 weeks ago, I think now, wasn't it, saw a result which really is, in my mind, gives us a real confidence in the future of this industry and the development of our country. 86 euros a megawatt hour in an environment. I'd been at a conference the previous day in Europe, an offshore, the largest offshore renewable floating conference, where in an industry where there had been something like a 40% increase in inflation in the likes of the steel components and other elements, for us to get a project which was, by comparison to any other country in terms of the first auction for a country, was one of the lowest prices seen. And the way that the auction was structured, where, yes, we provide indexation for a certain component prior to the financial closure decision, but also then for the operating system, but not having index linking for the other elements of the project, means that for the next 20 years, we have a really confident site that we could have low cost, relatively low cost power, lower than the other alternatives at the moment, and low carbon power at the same time. And that we can build up the expertise as we go into phase 2. And phase 2, the auction process will start later this year. There's a change, and a lot of people in the industry were critical of this change away from a developer-led model to a state plan-led model, but I think that was the right approach, and I'll explain shortly why. But I think we can be really confident that that plan-led approach, which is assessing the new areas for development on the basis of where is the good grid connection, where we reduce the environmental risks, and there are environmental risks and there are environmental trade-offs in the development of offshore wind. That's a reality that we have to acknowledge. It's very interesting listening to my German and Dutch and Danish and other colleagues. They're the first to admit that the biggest problem now, or one of the issues that we have to manage in every European country, is that there isn't absolutely no effect on the environment. And certain projects we've seen in the UK, in Germany or other countries, projects have had to exist within special protection areas or special areas of conservation, recognising that the benefits from the environment and climate side may compensate for some of the particular site-specific difficulties that take place. A lot of decisions on that will have to be taken at the European level. The European Commission has a key role, but we can minimise that risk by switching to this plan-led approach with designation of areas, with clear kind of the state in the future as we progress, really advancing as much information that we ourselves can develop to be able to take out the risk in terms of how these projects develop, particularly in environmental planning. And in all these incredibly large capital projects, I mean, the projects that got through the auction, just to give a sense of scale to members, I'm sure a lot will be aware, it's something like a €9 billion investment in the state. This is not a small investment. The more you can de-risk the planning and the policy certainty and the politics of this, I suppose, in a sense more than anything else, the lower the cost of capital, the lower the cost of project, the lower the cost of electricity for our people. And that's why today is important. It's to allow other parties, because this is going to be a long-term project, this is a 20, 30-year project ahead of us. The more we give clarity that, yes, we are going in this direction, we want to see these sort of projects developed, we want to tap into the the opportunity is not just in the development and deployment of renewable electricity, of the offshore turbines, it's also in the development of the power, of the use of the power when it comes ashore. And that's where we have a huge opportunity, particularly for our ports, but right around the country, particularly in the west, northwest, southwest, where the wind speeds are their greatest.